Today, for the first hour, it's India. For the second hour, it's China. And next week, we'll have a test on India and China, which will be similar to the test we have today, similar in format. The test 2 weeks from today, it'll be the 2 weeks from today, we'll have a multiple choice test. All right. Okay, India. One of the first papers I did when I was in graduate school was on the ancient Indian civilization. The fact is, I was very interested in history, but the history that I was taught was all Western civilization. I did not even know that the Harappan civilization existed until I was a senior in college. All we took in high school and college and elementary school was Western civilization, and I've had to learn Indian history and Chinese history and African history as I went along. Now, American Indians, we grew up reading books about the American Indians, and we watched American Indians on TV. But India and China I knew little about, but I found the study really fascinating. Now, what I'm teaching now, believe it or not, is standard geology. India was once attached to southern Africa, and the whole world was one big supercontinent called Pangaea. And India broke off, and unlike the other continents that scattered in separate directions, India wound up bumping into southern Asia, and when it did, it pushed up the Himalayan mountains, which are the tallest in the world. Now, how many of you have heard this from other sources about the continent splitting apart? And again, if you look at the map of the world, North and South America fits against Europe and Africa like pieces of a puzzle. They all were together at one time. Now, the Himalayas made news recently, and a big earthquake occurred there, and it knocked the Himalayan mountains down by a few inches. So Mount Everest is a few inches shorter than it was a year ago, or 3 months ago. Anyway, leaving that, the earliest history we know about India is the Harappan civilization. I thought this was a brand new marker, and it's not marking much better than the other one did. Anyway, now, we know little about the Harappans. We do have the writing. Now, I believe I may have failed to mention this last time, but when we start deciphering ancient writing, you cannot decipher it unless you have gobs and gobs of it, lots of it, and it helps if you have lexicons and dictionaries like we do with the Sumerian writings. But you have to have a lot of it. In the case of the Harappan, yes, we find scratches on some of the brickwork and etchings on some of those stones that we know is writing, but we don't have enough of it to decipher it, so we cannot read it. And until we get more, we may never be able to read it. We do know that they may be related to the modern Dravidians. This is somewhat debated. Where they came from, again, like the Sumerians, we simply don't know. They were located in the Indus Valley region, which is today Pakistan. They had a bunch of cities. The two main ones are Harappa, that's where we get the name Harappan, and Mohenjo-Daro. Now, they apparently experienced a change of climate. Particularly the rainfall became less. The course of the rivers changed. And this may have contributed to the decline. Their economy, based on farming, as was the economy of all ancient peoples, they did not have a manufacturing technological society. We do know that we find Mesopotamian artifacts in the Harappan region, and we find Harappan artifacts in Mesopotamia. So they were 1,000 miles apart. Apparently they traded with each other. Now, something else you'll find if you study Mohenjo-Daro. Now, last spring I had my students, I was assigned 2 papers, and I picked a topic, and one of the topics was Mohenjo-Daro. Mohenjo-Daro is a lot like ancient Egypt in that the farther back you go in time, the higher they seem to be. Now, you might say, how do we know this? Because when we dig, you assume that the digging you do, the deeper you dig, the farther back in time you're looking. The earliest brickwork appears to be much better than the later brickwork. The size of the bricks, the quality of the brickwork stayed the same for hundreds of years, and then it declined. The brickwork became inferior. The size of it, they did not make bricks the same size or the same quality. And it appears that their civilization did not advance, but instead declined, but started off fairly high. Now, these people had flush toilets. They had seemingly high-level baths, plumbing, indoor plumbing, water piped into each individual home. It appears that they didn't have any slum areas or poverty areas. It almost appears like they were all nearly equal. No priest, almost no hint of a religion, no hint of a king or a person who was above the rest of them. They appeared to have had maybe something of a socialistic type economy. And as is the case of all these socialistic type economies, and I'm going to be talking about socialism throughout the semester, I challenge anyone to find an instance where it actually works. This is no exception. And again, they declined and eventually they vanished. Now, in the case of Mohenjo-Daro, here's what I had the students write the paper about. There have been scholars who have gone into Mohenjo-Daro and say that there's evidence that Mohenjo-Daro was destroyed by nothing less violent than a nuclear type blast. Now, you don't have to believe it. There's not enough evidence to convince a skeptic. The evidence is there, but it's like you can't nail the lid on the coffin. You can believe it if you choose to. You don't have to believe it if you don't want to. But there have been persons who say there's a high level of radioactivity, plus there's a blast area, just like there would be if an atomic bomb had been dropped. And you found only about 40-some skeletons, and a lot of them are sitting in the middle of the street. They were covered by dust and dirt over a period of 3,000 years, but it looks like the skeletons died face down, actually holding hands, which is not the way people are buried. And also, you don't bury people on top of the street, folk. But over time, I mean, the skeletons were never bothered by scavenging animals. No animal seems to come back. And the skeletons, according to some accounts, had a high level of radioactivity. And nobody came back to steal the loot, and eventually there was plenty of and buried or dead. If you know anything about nuclear blast, if we ever have a bomb dropped on us, folk, get rid of your rings, get rid of your watches, all particularly gold and silver and metal work. They'll become contaminated for hundreds of years. If you haven't heard this already, you need to. But in other words, nobody came in to take the loot. Nobody came back in to bury their dead. It looks like almost everybody left the city. Their written records, yes, they do have written records, written in their language called Sanskrit. Again, what they wrote in Sanskrit is subject to interpretation. Some scholars say they wrote about the blast that was as bright as the sun or several times brighter than the sun, destroyed everything. Other scholars say they didn't. Again, you are left to decide for yourself what you choose to believe. Now, your book shows a picture of Mohenjo-Daro. What it does not show is the blast area. It does show what looks like a bath, a public bath. Again, all the houses follow the same pattern, the same plan. And it looks like there was a society that had a lot of fear of thievery because you could not get inside their house from the roadway. You had to go through an alleyway to sneak in the house. The front of it was blocked off, no windows, no doors in the front. So if you walk down the street, you'd see a bunch of solid brick walls. Again, indicating that these people might have had a serious moral lapse. Again, we wish we had some of the writings that we could read. Now, the Harappan culture gave way to a new culture called the Aryan. The Aryans were definitely an Indo-European people. Now they came down. Long about the year 1800 BCE, or now, okay, let me explain. I say BCE. When I was a youngster, we called it BC and AD. BC meant before Christ, and AD stood for Latin words that simply meant Anno Domini, in the year of our Lord. We measured time from the approximate birth of Jesus. Now we actually know the scholar who figured out Jesus' birth erred by at least 4 years, so Christ actually would have been born in 4 BCE and not in the year 0. But today we don't call it, we want to be more politically correct, so we call it BCE, before the Common Era, or CE, in the Common Era. It's not AD anymore, it's CE. Anyway, about 1800 BCE, the Indo-Europeans began to move, and among the peoples who moved were the Greeks, the Latins. The Greeks settled in Greece, the Latins settled in Italy, the Medes and Persians settled in Persia, Medes, and then the Aryans. The Aryans went on to settle in India. I mentioned last time, so you've all heard it. A man in the 20th century had a real fascination with these Aryans, a man named Adolf Hitler. Now, here's the thing about the Aryans. Being Indo-European, they were white. The people living in India were black. So the Aryans set themselves up as being the rulers over the black peoples of India. But over time, the Aryans themselves became black. How did this happen? It wasn't because of the bright Indian sunshine that darkened their skin. It wasn't because there was something in the soil that made their skin turn black. No, they intermarried with a local native black population. And first one, maybe then another, and after a few years. But this is something that persists in the 20th century. In India, the lighter your skin was, the higher you were looked on. The darker your skin was, you were looked on as being more inferior. I mean, for folks, I'm just stating a fact. This is not, in no way do I want to subscribe to it, but I have to state because it is history. This is a history class. But they looked on the Aryans as being superior, that white being superior, and Adolf Hitler took this up and just stated, yeah, the Germans are the real true Aryans, and we Germans are the master race, and you Britons are second behind us because you, after all, some of you came from Germany. So the Britons were number 2, the Aryans were number 1, and at the very bottom were the Jews, who were so inferior they had to be destroyed. That was Hitler's view, you have to understand. Anyway, now, folks, something else I must state here. When I've given papers in the past, I've had some particularly black men who have had a fascination for Adolf Hitler. Do any of you know that Adolf Hitler sterilized every black person he could find to keep them from repopulating? And then, during the 1936 Olympics, which were held in Germany, he had to sit and watch as a black runner outran all his superior white runners. The black runner's name was Jesse Owen. He also had to watch as a black boxer named Joe Louis defeated a German white boxer. The German Max Schmeling won the first round, the first match. They had a rematch, and Joe Louis won the second. Had a third match, and Joe Louis won that one. Have you ever heard this from other sources? Yeah. And Hitler all he could do was sit in the stands and with a look of just awestruck on his face. You know, these runners defeated his, and these boxers defeated his white. Anyway, but again, I don't mean to open up racial wounds, but folks, I can't sweep it under the rug either. It is a part of the lesson. But I'm only teaching because it's part of the lesson, not because I want to expound any of this, because I don't believe any of it. All right, but they did, and that's what's important. The Aryans, again, came from Europe. Now, we at one time said that the Aryans were the one who displaced the Harappans. Now, folk, we do not know this. Today, I mean, when I first started teaching here in the year 2000, I taught what I was taught, that the Aryans had displaced the Harappans. Now we're saying we don't know why the Harappan civilization failed and what role the Aryans played in it, if any, we don't know. The Aryans apparently were nomadic horsemen who swooped down on their horses, conquered, and took over. Now, time went on. The Aryan society grew in size. Eventually, the Greeks arrived. Particularly, the Greeks were led by a man named Alexander the Great. Now, we're going to talk about Alexander when we come to the chapter. In fact, I'll probably spend 20 or 30 minutes on him. I mean, he was actually a Macedonian, but he was enamored by the Greek civilization, and he spread Greek civilization wherever he went. But he went into India and defeated an Indian army and had plans to conquer India. However, his troops refused to march any farther, and even though he claimed to be God, without an army he simply could not go on. His troops, from the generals to the privates, all the way up and down the ranks, simply said, no, we're going home. And all Alexander could do was go home. Now, something else. Alexander fought many a battle. Alexander claimed to be son of Zeus. He claimed an oracle told him he was not the son of Philip, the king, the former king. That he actually was the son of Zeus. Zeus was his father. And when he went into battle, unlike the other generals who would stay in the back of the battle and watch it from maybe a lofty height or from a distance, he led his troops in battle. The troops marching about behind him, and he was the first person to engage an enemy. And he did this for battle after battle and was never wounded until he came to India. And in India, according to standard history, he was wounded by an arrow. Well, maybe it sounds logical. I have read, though, that the arrow might have been a particularly guided missile. All right, which brings me up to another point. I mean, I don't know how Alexander, I knew Alexander was badly wounded, and he lived only a short time after his wound and died maybe about a year or two after his wound. Never fully recovered from the wound. The wound punctured him in the chest. The Sanskrit language, well, I tell you what, I'm going to save that for a few minutes. I mean, it describes the Vedas, which I'll save for a little bit. Anyway, one of Alexander's followers was a man named Chandragupta Maurya. Let's see, make sure. You all should have copied this now anyway. Yeah, okay. Now, he is believed to have been one of Alexander's followers, even though he was an Indian. He joined Alexander's army and became high up in Alexander's army. When Alexander left, he took over, and he made India into a fairly great empire. Alexander had started the process of uniting India. He largely united India and made India into a great trading center and into a fairly wealthy country. Now, which brings us up to religion. We do not know who the founder of Hinduism was. Their religion is called Hinduism. Now, that word Hindu has to do with anything that pertains to India. It's not necessarily just their religion, but anything to do with India is Hindu. Anyway, the religion appears to develop over time. And it is characterized by something that they did not have originally. I mean, the original people of the Harappans did not seem to have social classes. But when the Aryans came, they seemed enamored by the idea of having a caste system. In other words, we're going to put everybody in groups called caste. At the top caste will be the priest. The next caste will be the nobles and the king. They even had the priest, iron king. Then would be the warrior class. Just below the warrior caste would be the merchant caste. And then at the very bottom, the fifth caste, would be the pariahs or outcast. Now, the caste system was to persist in India all the way up until the 20th century, when due to external pressures only, there were attempts made to undermine it. However, it's still a big part of Indian society. Now, all right, if you talk to a person in India today, they will tell you, oh, we don't have an outcast anymore. We have integrated them into mainstream society. On paper, they're telling the truth. But it reminds me of our own country's history, where we passed the 15th Amendment to the Constitution in 1868 that gave blacks the right to vote. You'll notice it said 1868. Well, in 1960, most blacks in this country still could not vote. But on paper, they had the right. But in actual reality, folk, again, this is standard history. Same way with the caste system in India. On paper, they'll tell you they've outlawed the caste system. But in actual reality, it's still part of the culture. Yes?
So, I know this is more like current history, I guess, but did Nepal come off of India because they have a pretty strict caste system?
Nepal, yeah, it's still a problem. Yeah, and, I don't know why they broke off, but I know that they would not join up with the rest of India, possibly because of that reason. I know that Pakistan and Bangladesh broke off because they're primarily Muslim. India has not been able to unite, I'm jumping into the story, but India has not been able to unite itself for 2,000 years. They always have some issues that keep them from unity, either it's mostly religious or political. Now, something else I'll say about the caste system. There was a young woman who dated another Indian man who was outside her caste. Her father killed her. This is how strict it is. Now, this crime I'm talking about, folks, did not occur in India. It occurred here in the United States. They took the case to court and they said, I thought I had freedom of religion here. That's my religion. If my daughter dates someone outside of our caste, I have a right or a duty to kill her. The judge says, well, our law does not allow that here. And the man was sentenced. Again, this crime occurred about 10 years ago and occurred right here in the United States. So, there are persons who will tell you that, oh yes, we've done away with that. You can marry outside your caste, but in reality, it's still a big issue in a lot of India, and someone pointed out it might still be a big issue in Nepal. In addition, another part of it, of Indian religion, is the belief in reincarnation. Your book opens up the chapter with a big net about a young man about to go into battle, and he's going to battle with men who used to be his playmates growing up. I'm going to have to kill these men or they're going to kill me, and I dread the thoughts of killing people whom I really like. But then as old philosopher advised him, hey, to be born is to be certain to die, and to die is to be certain to be born. Everything keeps going on and on over and over again. Don't worry about it. All these people you're going to kill in battle will come back in another one form or another. And the belief in reincarnation was a belief that if you led a good enough life in this life, you'd come back in the next life in a higher state, a better form. And eventually, if you led a really, really good life, you could reach the ultimate high state of existence. Oh yes, the original, I must mention too, originally had a god called Deus, and that may sound like the Greek Zeus or the Spanish Dios, or the Roman Jupiter, maybe the same, but originally it was believed that the people of India may have been monotheistic, worship one god. Now, folk, a skeptic will not believe it. It's like a lot of other things. If you want to believe it, there's evidence that you can, that the original religion of mankind was monotheism, and then the worship of one god faded in importance among most people, and they took on the worship of many gods. As Deus became less and less important, other gods rose to prominence. Now, the four Vedas. The four Vedas were hymns. They were originally religious literature and written in Sanskrit. Now, Sanskrit is like European Latin, more like the Sumerian language. It's no longer spoken. Latin is no longer spoken in Europe. Sumerian ceased to be spoken in Sumer for many generations. Ceased to be spoken for many generations, though. They used it as their sacred tongue. And in the same way the Europeans, they used Latin as the language for their Bible and their hymns and the language of church services for many generations. Sanskrit was their original tongue for many years. And they told me when I was a youngster that if I would learn Sanskrit, I could almost name a price because not very many American scholars knew it. Today, this is not as true as it once was. Four Vedas. The earliest Veda is the Rig Veda. And then, like every other religious religious writings, they have commentaries. What do these writings actually mean? So they wrote commentaries on them. Now, what you're going to see here is in the book, or was in the book, the idea that the earth is a sphere. They knew the earth was round like a ball. They studied the astronomy, charted the paths of the heavenly bodies. True. Now, folk, again, you're going to have to pardon me for saying some of these things, but this, again, may seem far out. The Rig Veda, the earliest of the Vedas, actually describes machines that could fly, Vimanas, and describes weapons that sound almost like nuclear weapons. Again, if you don't believe it, check it out. Look up Rig Veda. If you go to the right websites, now, if you only read peer-reviewed literature written by scholars, you won't find information like this. But nevertheless, there are persons who say that these machines, these devices, are described in the Vedas, which may help explain why Alexander, who never was wounded in battle until he came to India, might have been hit by something, by a guided missile, not by an ordinary arrow. Sacrifice was a big part of all ancient religions, including Hinduism. Originally, they appeared to have practiced human sacrifice, but as time went on, human sacrifices were abandoned and animal sacrifices came before. Asceticism, that means deprivation. Asceticism was a big part of these religions. They believed that by doing things like walking on a bed of hot coals, lying on a bed of spikes, that they could get themselves to think lofty thoughts or get out of their body and into the spirit realm. Communicate with the gods, gain magical powers, or assume a certain stance and stay in that stance for hours on end, and maybe for days, and that this would help them get out of their physical self and get into the spiritual self. And this eventually evolved into yoga, or another word for yoga is union. Again, I mentioned reincarnation. For the Indian, the ultimate state of reality was Brahman. And once you had achieved that state, you had achieved the highest level of existence that you could. And the people of India would hope that, now if they were bad in this life, they might come back in the form of a cow, or a rat, or even a snake, some really doleful, vile creature. Now, here's something now that I have a I have a personal vendetta against this belief, folks. The Hindus believe in nonviolence. So what's wrong with nonviolence? Simply this. Nonviolence encourages your enemies to attack you. The people of India had a tradition of, we don't believe in killing, we don't believe in fighting. And yet they had, like everyone else, wars incessantly. Now, the reason I'm so hard against it, I was brought up this way. I mean, my father taught his sons to be conscientious objectors. And one of my brothers became one. I didn't. I eventually joined the Army myself because I realized if you don't stand up for yourself, all right, let me tell you, I know we're in the middle of a Jewish community, and some of you might be Jewish. In no way do I mean to be offensive to you Jews. I mean, I'll tell you, my wife is part Jewish. She can prove it by her genealogy. But between the wars, World War I and World War II, the Jews were like everybody else taught pacifism, that we should never go to war for any reason. Then they were thrown alive into ovens, folk. Kicking and screaming, thrown alive into hot ovens and burned to ashes alive. Most of you hopefully have heard this. Today, you won't find a Jewish rabbi who teaches pacifism. You'll hear of pacifism. This is what people will do to you if you don't stand up for yourself and fight. If we didn't have an army in this country, our enemies would come in right this minute and take from us, I'm talking about America, everything we have. Now, if you don't like what I'm saying, I don't like it either. Why do I say it? Because it's reality. War has been a part of mankind's existence from the beginning, and we have found no cure for it. And about the time we think we're going to make war sane and civil, up comes a group of people who teaches us that we have to fight them the same way we always have. And I'll tell you something, folks, we have not really won a big major war since World War II. Our country, and we won't until we decide to fight it the old-fashioned way. Get in and actually tear the enemy to pieces. I know you probably don't like, but I don't like it either. But they had a tradition of, we don't believe in fighting. We believe in nonviolence. So what happened? The country was destined to remain disunited for 2,000 years and still disunited today and be conquered by their enemies from outside. Partly they were conquered by the Muslims for a time, and the Muslims still have Pakistan and Bangladesh. They were conquered by Alexander the Great before the Muslims. Then later they were conquered by the British, and the British held them for about 100 years. They've been ruled by outsiders and foreigners or fighting among themselves, divided. Karma. I mean, that's the word, karma. The actions in this life that determine what state a person will be in after his reincarnation, or what the good deeds you do or the bad deeds you don't do. They believe that all life is sacred, even animal life. They do not eat meat. Again, folk, when I was a kid, our teachers taught us that there were enough cattle in India to alleviate all their poverty and alleviate all their hunger. But because of their religion, they would not eat the beef because it was against their religion. So a lot of them starved to death. Now, I want to say this, folks, that I've observed, folk, about persons who have a high regard for animal life. They oftentimes have a wholehearted, crass attitude toward human life. And India was no exception. In India, now this was still going on as recently as when I was a child, the trucks would go around the streets looking for a dead body, pick up the dead body, take it to outside to a dump area and dump it off. If you lived in India, I mean, this, Mother Teresa changed a lot of this, by the way. A person dropped dead beside you and you just walk on, hey, we don't care. No compassion. Compassion is lacking. It's not known for charity or for care for the suffering. Now, again, some of this has changed in recent years. Again, thanks to the influence of Westerners who came in and Mother Teresa who came in and said, hey, these people you've forgotten about because they took sick. I mean, at one time, if you took sick, they just dumped you off into a house. And a lot of these people can recover and come out. And she nursed a lot of them back to health. But there was no care for the human suffering, no charity, no help for the poor. Hi. Any comments? Yes.
Well, just when you were talking, I always remember growing up because my father's family is the Indians.
Yeah.
And everything that you say actually is true according to what I experienced growing up. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I have heard it. I mean, believe it or not, if you think I'm looking scared, I don't know the backgrounds of some of it. Some of you might be of Indian origin yourself. And I'm thinking, well, am I offending you? And I am concerned that I offend. But folk, the truth is the truth and must be said, even though, it might not sound pleasant. Every group of people has disgraced himself in one way or another. Every group. There's no group exception. Anyone who studied American history knows of the misdeeds of Americans in time past in dealing with Africans and dealing with Indians. Every group has disgraced itself in one. So, but we're all in this together. We have to learn from our mistakes and go on. The people of India did not really change until outsiders influenced them. But anyway, I'm glad you said that. Very much so. Again, Buddhism. Now, I remember discussing this with my boss when I worked at Lockheed once. I worked at Lockheed for 27 years, and he said he just didn't believe his story. It sounds fetched. But folks, the story I'm about to tell is a story that is some 2,600 years old. And it's been told over and over again, so if it sounds a little bit unreal, let it be, but nevertheless, this is the way they told it. The founder of Buddhism, and there was a founder, Gautama. He was the son of a king, and some soothsayer came to this king one day and said, your son is going to be the founder of a religion, but you'd better do everything you can to protect him. So the father then made sure that his son never saw sorrow. And folks, this is a big mistake. The son never attended a funeral, never saw an old man, never saw a poor man. And every time he went for a walk, the servants would go ahead of him and make sure they cleared away everybody who was poor or sick. But one day the servants were not thorough enough. And the young Buddha, I'll call him Buddha, the young Buddha happened to chance upon an old man. And Buddha he was 20 years old and he was just thrown in a state of shock. You mean, how did this man, what makes him different from us? Well, sir, he's been around a long time. Well, you mean we all become this way? Well, the shock was just more than the young Buddha could bear, and he went into a state of deep melancholy, realizing that, he hadn't realized he was going to someday grow old like everyone else and die. His father had so protected him. And again, to me, this is protection of the wrong kind. So he eventually developed a religion that's centered around that we have to get rid of our desires. And once we abandon desire, all things like pain, suffering, and poverty can be forgotten. It was more egalitarian than Hinduism in that his ultimate state of high existence was nirvana. And he believed that everybody could aspire to nirvana. Now, did he even believe there was a God? Folk like Confucius, whom we'll talk about that, we do not even know if he believed in God. He rejected a lot of the gods of Hinduism, and his idea has been called a philosophy rather than a religion. He rejected the extremes of asceticism and materialism, and his way has been called the middle path. Now, folk don't memorize these. Well, actually, I learned some basics. It was a matter of right. Right thoughts, right knowledge, right purpose, right speech, right conduct, right occupation, right effort, right awareness, right meditation. If you can remember 3 of them, you'll be doing well. If this were a course in Buddhism, you'd be expected to learn them all and go into much more detail. Being egalitarian, of course, he put women higher than Hinduism did. Male superiority was a part of all Indian family life, though. The man ruled over the woman, and this was true in Buddhist society as well as others. Now, some practical aspects of Buddhism. Buddhism, for a time, actually threatened to take over India. We'll talk about this when we get into India next time. But it failed, partly because the people of India just liked their caste system, and partly because Hinduism made some modifications that attracted people back to it. Instead, Buddhism was to spread into Southeast Asia and become the dominant religion among the civilized people of Southeast Asia. And I'm talking about Laos, Vietnam, Indonesia, and those places in Southeast Asia. Buddhism also spread into China. Now, some religions go out and proselytize, try to make converts. Other religions are just content to remain among their own people. Judaism itself generally does not try to make converts. You're either born a Jew or you're not a Jew. Christianity does try to proselytize, make converts among them. Buddhism was aggressive in trying to convert new people. They went into China, and they made some headway in China, Japan, and Korea. But in Japan, the Japanese preferred their own religion. In China, the same way the Chinese rejected religions that were outside of themselves, that had been founded by outsiders, until 1949 when they accepted communism. Other than that, though, the Chinese have been skeptical of foreign religions, thinking that their way is better. Anyway, Buddhism is still one of the world's top religions. It has been threatened in recent years by communism on one side, Islam on another, Christianity on another, Confucianism on another, and they've had a difficult time holding on to their people. Buddhism is known for its magnificent temples and magnificent, I'll call them monasteries. Places where their holy people live and try to live apart from the world. Now, Jainism. Don't worry about the name of the founder. They were extreme. You know, Buddhism has been called the middle path because on the one hand there was Hinduism, on the other hand Jainism, with Buddhism somewhat in the middle. They failed to attract many followers. Now, something I want to say about Jainism, it's not in the book, but one of our pupils who've been in it told me, and if any of you know any different, you're welcome to put in what you know, that the Jainians do not believe that the world had a beginning. They believe that the world we see always existed, that it's always been here and it's always going to go on, and just an endless cycle of on and on and on, no beginning and there'll be no end. Again, this is somewhat offensive to basic human reasoning because in Western society we believe that everything must have had a beginning and will possibly someday have something of an end. Both of them, Buddhism and Jainism, came into existence sometime after 600 BCE, after Hinduism. Hinduism was first. All right. Now we get away from the religion into political history. I've already mentioned Chandragupta Maurya, one of Alexander's followers, or possibly. The next member of the Mauryan dynasty that was great was Asoka. He wound up conquering almost all of India, something that no leader after him was able to do. But he built up an empire that got most of the Indian peninsula. Once he'd gotten it, he converted to Buddhism. Once he converted to Buddhism, he devoted himself to peace. He again tried to foster trade. I mean, I used to when I was good, what is the importance of trade? Well, I mean simply this. You cannot put together a device as simple as an ordinary flashlight from materials you can find in one place on the globe. You might find the metal casing from one part of the globe, the glass from another, the material to make the diode, this is the diode light from another, the rubber that is used to seal it, and that's the switch from another part of the world. You have to be able, and let me tell you something, I put together many a radio, and I'm about to think of putting together another one. The parts procurement becomes a big thing. In fact, when I was a youngster, starting out in electronics, parts procurement was really difficult. Today, we have eBay, we have the internet, but believe it or not, a lot of parts that you once found you can no longer find. And we had a case where that a system, a security system, failed at our church, and the system was old, and the parts that we used to make it we no longer had. The company that made it was out of business. We had to spend $250,000 to buy a whole new system and rewire it from the beginning from scratch. Because, and some of you are going to run into this. I mean, I ran into this one time. I bought a garage door opener, remote control garage, not garage opener, an alarm system. Lightning hit it. I went back to Radio Shack. Oh, we don't make that anymore. You have to start from scratch and buy a whole new outfit. We can't repair that either. We don't make it anymore. If you haven't run into this yet, you will. Yeah, a lot of these things can no longer be repaired because the factory had made it. Well, anyway, back to trade. To make anything, you have to be able to get parts from this place and that, because there's no one place on earth that has everything you need. So trade is extremely important in developing commerce. This part of the world might produce more of a certain product than what it needs, but that part of the world produces more of another product, so this product trades its surplus to that part for what they don't need. And eventually you get everything together that you need to have a happy life. Again, trade, very important. Automobile. You start looking up where the parts to an automobile originally came from, and you'll find that the aluminum came from here, the iron came from here, the rubber came from there, the glass came from there. You have to get all these parts together in one place. All right. Maria Gupta sent, Asoka, sent Buddhist missionaries to try to convert the Indians to Buddhism. And like I say, India was seemingly on the verge of converting. Eventually, though, Hinduism made some changes. He built polished stone pillars to commemorate events in Buddha's life and point the way to holy places. And then, when Asoka died shortly afterward, India fell to a period of political disunity. And eventually the Mauryan dynasty was overthrown. And it was to be 500 years before anyone could unite India, but that takes us up to the Middle Ages, Indian Middle Ages. What you have in India is what's called the rule of the fishes. If you know anything about fish, the big fish eat up the smaller one. And I remember when I was about 23 years old watching a childish video about this bully. And this bully went to sleep and dreamed, and he heard a song. He was a big fish, oh yeah, he was a big fish, oh yeah. He was a bigger fish, and he was a big fish eating up the smaller fish. But then one day a bigger fish came and ate him up. And when he woke up, he changed his ways. But basically, rule the fishes, the big fish rules the small ones. Warfare came to be looked on as being the sport of kings. You know, instead of cities playing basketball with each other or baseball, they sent their armies to try to conquer each other. And kings would be looked on as being great depending on how many battles they won or how big of an army they had. Most of his history then, India was to be fragmented politically or under the control of foreigners. Now, about the caste system, I've had persons tell me that they know of cases where people did rise above their caste. In every society that has any type of social structure at all, or social hierarchy at all, there have always been people who were born into poverty and who rose to the top. There was a pope who was born dirt poor. And I'm trying to think of his name. Anyway, I can't think of his name. But anyway, there was a pope and who rose to become a pope. But there have been cases throughout history. In our own country's history, there was Andrew Jackson, born in a log cabin, rose to the presidency. Abraham Lincoln, born in a log cabin, rose to the presidency. There have always been cases, and that's even true in India, where people would. Now, some of it due to their ability. They had ability, but in other cases, a lot of it's just simply due to they had good fortune along the way. And you might say the winds of luck kind of blew their way and they were able to take advantage of it. Terms. Don't worry about these and these and this. Pariah, yes. Yeah, Brahmins, yes. High caste. Raja, prince, Maharaja, great high prince, or prince above other princes. Again, I believe Mario wrote the treatise on politics, Chandagupta Maurya. Don't worry about it though for right now. It was, anyway, the pariahs, yes, do remember that even though the caste system was designed to make sure a person stayed put. Now, again, it was about 30 years ago when Jimmy Carter was becoming president. One woman I was living in Calhoun, Georgia at the time. One woman said, he started out, he was a dirt farmer, he was a peanut farmer. A body should not get above his raising. I didn't say a word. I mean, it was funny to meet a person like that, there's no point in talking to him. But folk, you should be above your raising. Everybody should, at least try to. That's what we're kind of here on earth for. Yes, and I feel like in a lot of ways I've gotten above my raising. Where my sons and my daughters follow me, advancing farther than I have. I hope so. All right. Marriage in India. Marriages were generally arranged, and this has been true throughout much of India's history. The fact that they looked on the merchants as being the fourth class just above the pariahs should tell you something. The Chinese had the same problem. They looked down on people who traded goods for money. And China did the same thing, and a lot of people believe that this was one of the reasons that they ultimately failed to advance any higher than they did. All right. Anybody have any comments, questions?
Isn't there actually a class in between the Sayas and the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, I believe?
The farmers. The farmers. I think I said the merchants were next. Okay, yeah, I've got the merchants, and then the farmers, and then the pariah. I don't know if there's a caste in between them or not.
Yeah, there's one that's, I had to study.
Okay,
But the
well, maybe
pariahs-
there is.
But the
Again,
pariahs I thought were part of the caste because they were the lowest of them. They were no longer,
they're part of the farmers. Then I mean the pariahs are associated with the farmer caste.
I thought the pariahs was a terminology for someone who fell outside of the caste.
Outside outcasts.
They were literally the bottom of it.
Bottom.
didn't
They
belong.
never belonged to any caste.
Yeah, and the farmers were kind of stuck in the bottom of the peasants.
The peasants. Yeah, that's basically it. The majority of people in most of these societies are what we would call poor. And if you look at my page on comparative religions and comparative societies, generally the people who seem to care the absolute least about helping the poor were the Hindus. And of course, now in some societies, like among the American Indian tribal peoples, or the African and Far East Asian tribal peoples, they didn't have any poor. There was no rich or no poor. Everybody was all equal, egalitarian. But their cultural level folk was, to me, pretty low. It just seems like to have a high level of culture, you have to have some people who achieve and some who don't. And some who climb higher and some who don't. It's just an unfortunate fact of life. Okay, again, the Hindus are notorious for their artwork. Now, something that I want to point out to you, on page 60 in your book, there is a magnificent temple there on the left. It looks like that European. Now, a lot of folks say that Europeans copied Hindu artwork. That some Europeans went to India. But the thing that's so magnificent about that temple on the left, the Hindu temple, is it's carved into solid rock. It's not something that they made. I mean, they actually went in with their folk. We don't know how they did it. And all the furniture, all the pillars that support it, and the ceiling, the floor, and all of it is carved into solid rock. The hallways, the separate rooms, and they just simply took the rock, hollowed it out. It's like a cave almost. It's a natural cave, not an artificial. And again, we don't know how they managed to do this. Just like a lot of other mysteries in the ancient world. Okay.